Good morning, David.
Good morning, Karat.
My question today to you is, what are the various categories of risk?
Yes, we generally think of risk as a whole thing. So we're doing risk management, all risks, and we're doing risk identification, all of the risks, and we're assessing all the risks. But risks come in different flavors or different types. And so it's important for us to have a broad view of risk to make sure that we don't miss any important categories. So risk categories or risk types are defined or listed as a kind of prompt, as a reminder to say, well, don't forget there's financial risk and there's reputation risk and there's environmental risk and there's safety risk and there's strategic risk and there's project and operational risk. Now, that's a very long list. How do you remember all of those things? Well, you could write them down and just make a list on a piece of paper or on a tablet or put it on the wall and then just go down the list. That's okay. I think there's a better way to do it, which is to organize our risk categories in a way that makes sense. So you'll notice in answers to other questions, what we've been trying to do is to go behind the jargon and look at the underlying logic or the underlying framework. And if we understand that, then the detail becomes clear. So the same is true with risk categories. I like to think in hierarchical terms or layers or levels. So we could say at the very highest level, there's just risks.
Yep.
But we could then think about how we might divide that into types of risks.
Yes.
What we're looking for is where the risk comes from. And I think there are 4 major types of risk. You might think differently, maybe you think there's 3 or 5, but to think about major sources of risk. So my 4 would be this. There are technical risks. And depending on what type of industry or sector or project or implementation you're talking about, the technical risks will be different. If you're building a bridge, or if you're developing a new drug, or if you're moving an office complex from one side of the city to the other, the technical risks will be different. But as a general heading, there are technical risks.
Yes.
And most things that we do have technical risks of some sort.
Mm-hmm.
Then we have commercial risks for most organizations. There are some charities and not-for-profit and government and so on that don't have that kind of commercial exposure. But generally, commercial is a category of risk, a big category.
Yes.
And underneath there's lots of detail. But as a big headline item, you've got technical risks and commercial risks. Then we normally have management risks. Risks that are internal to the organization in the way that we structure ourselves, the way that we make decisions, that we prioritize, that we communicate, that we resource, all of the things to do with our organization itself. There are ways in which we manage which give rise to internal risks. And then if those are the internal risks that come from management, another big category are external risks. Yes. Things that are outside of our control, like the weather, like competition in the marketplace, like regulatory authorities, like the law or politics. These are external to our organization and they bring risks.
That's right.
So we might say in terms of categories, from the top there's just the world of risks, general. But there are 4 big headings which apply in all situations: technical risks, commercial, management and external. So that would be our level 1. Then below that we could break out another level. So we could say under technical, let's imagine we're doing some software development. We might talk about technology, about interfaces, about processes, about testing. Yeah. These are all technical types of risk under the heading of technical.
That's right.
Under commercial we might have subcontracts, we might have our own client contracts, terms and conditions, yeah. Legal liabilities, warranties. These are commercial types of exposure. Under management we might have policies and procedures, strategy. We might have resourcing, communication, reputation. These are all things to do with the management, yes. Which could give rise to risks. And then under external, we've mentioned the weather and the competition and the marketplace and legal frameworks, regulatory frameworks, lobby groups, and so on.
That's right.
So what you do is, once you've got the big heading, you go below that to the detail.
Yeah.
Now we have a structured way of thinking when we come to identify the risks and to assess them and to group them and to learn lessons about risk. We've got a framework which says not just, well, there's 20 different categories to remember. There are 4 headline categories, yeah. Technical, commercial, management and external. You could remember those. And then that gives you a focus. And then under each of those, you could say, oh, technical, I know what that is.
Yes.
That's processes and
Yes.
technology and interfaces and so on. And then when we come to identify risks, we can go through the categories
Yes.
and use those different headings as a
Yep.
prompt. So the categories are defined in layers.
Yes.
Now what we can do once we have that, and that has a name. So all of these things have jargon names. It's a breakdown structure or a hierarchy. So we call it a risk breakdown structure, an RBS. And that's the technical name for this kind of hierarchy of sources of risk. And it's something which I developed actually in the year 2002, I think. It's become quite a standard tool within the risk sector. So what we can do then is when we're identifying risks, we can use these different level 2 headings as a prompt.
Yep.
We can then record risks in
Yep.
each of those headings as a checklist.
Yes.
We can look for concentrations of risk once we've identified them to see if there are particular areas of focus. So maybe there's lots of interface risk or lots of political risk or lots of subcontractor risk. By mapping the risks into the risk breakdown structure, we can see if we've missed something. Do you know, we never thought about anything commercial. Why is that? Because there's no one from the commercial department in our management team. So maybe we've missed a whole set of risks. So having a structured view of risk categories helps us to make sure we don't miss anything, to learn from the future, and to make sure that our risk identification covers the whole breadth of risks.
Thank you very much, David. And that indeed, I'm going to remember that term, RBS.
Please do.
Thank you very much.